obviously compliance has to be embedded within the business from the get-go. We are taking transactions globally. We're paying millions of pounds out of commissions. And then we have to be legally compliant in local markets everywhere where we do business. And that's a lot of work. My name is Mathijs. I'm originally from the Netherlands. I'm one of the founders of Moteefe, e-commerce platform launched in London in 2015.
And what do you do at Moteefe? What do you do as a business?
As a business, we're an e-commerce platform focused on on-demand production, which basically means that we provide retailers of all sizes a turnkey solution to design and sell products online. And what means turnkey basically means we provide stores, payments, production, fulfillment, everything in one single platform.
So what I've seen while doing my research is just that for your clients, this effectively provides the opportunity for them to almost test products in a very cost-effective way. So how did you see the need for this, and how did you get started with the business?
Originally, the need came from something I experienced myself. I wanted to be active in e-commerce and start selling products online and become an entrepreneur. But I was a one-man band, all working by myself. And if you think about it, e-commerce sounds like a very exciting opportunity, and it is. Yet it's very daunting if you've got to manage everything yourself. You got to find your products, you got to build your stores, you got to manage payments and all of the risks that are associated with this. And then you start to kind of figure out who you're going to sell into. So the real need came from that alongside seeing things like Shopify emerge back in 2014, realizing that it's a really great solution, but it's a piecemeal. It's not an end-to-end proposition. So putting the supply chain alongside your e-commerce environment as a proposition to any merchant, all of a sudden gives you a far more rounded proposition and something to get going quickly.
And what made you start this in London? You mentioned you're from the Netherlands, which seems to be just booming at the moment for entrepreneurship. So why London?
I have two co-founders, whom we met during studies in Singapore, and I was the one without a girlfriend, and they were with, and both were living in London. So it was 2 against 1 vote. I voted Amsterdam, they picked London, so I packed the bags and moved over.
So more a circumstance thing, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And so you meet your co-founders, you realize there's a real need for this as a service and product. What were the first steps you had to put in place to get this going?
I mean, the first step obviously was, finding a team, some co-founders with some skills, because myself and Olivier, my co-founder, we met initially, but we don't have a technical background. So we're fortunate enough to find Lev, our third co-founder, who's been our CTO for many years from the start. But yeah, then the first step is really diving into the market, understanding the proposition, speaking to potential users, and figuring out what's really driving product market fit. And alongside just a lot of testing. So we put an MVP website live. We started figuring out the building blocks and just took it to market. And that's really the first 12 months or so. And just learning and iterating and taking from there until you hit something where you're like, hey, I've got something here. Let's invest in that more and deeper. And that's when the fun starts.
And I suppose that's the point then when you started looking at funding and really scaling the business.
Yeah, absolutely. We were self-funded from the start, and the moment we got traction within the segment that we wanted to play in, we took some of the metrics and said, well, if we put some more money in, we can just grow this quicker. And that was really the decision point. We had the metrics. We were confident we're in the right market. We had an MVP that was proven to work, and so we took on the decision to start raising some money.
And what was your strategy when it came to raising the funds in terms of finding the right investors? What were the things you had to get in line before you did so? What did that look like?
I mean, in 2016 when we started, I had never raised money before, so I had no idea either. I remember at some points I was pitching to a bunch of people in a pub, literally, and I think everybody was slightly having a really good time with drinks, and I think I was pitching to a jury, but I don't really know anymore. And it was really just about getting into the network. We were fortunate enough to be part of a little accelerator program called Mass Challenge at the time, and that really helped us to just be close to other startups and being able to share tips and tricks and learn from their experiences, and that opened up a bit of a network of angel investors, and then you know what to look for, where to reach out to, having conversations, open up some doors, and we took it from there. It was really optimistic, just getting on the learning curve initially, because we came with limited experience of having done it ever before.
Absolutely. And following that process, so you secure your funding. What were the next steps then? What needed to be put in place to really scale this?
We the first thing we did is hired a couple of engineers within the business to you know, we build our MVP with external contractors, alongside obviously Lev, my co-founder, and we still work with them to date actually. So there's been a really successful partnership. But we complemented that team with a couple of engineers in house to just get more firepower. You know, it's a platform play. So that's really the first things we did, and then obviously myself and Olivier were dividing the work that has to do everything outside engineering, supply chain, commercial, and it's really you take it from day to day, week to week. It's just been really agile and trying to get more users onto the platform and be successful.
And that seems to have really ramped up from what I've seen over the past year, really, which has been a tricky time for a lot of businesses. You seem to have really boomed. So what do you think the reasons behind that were?
I think timing is definitely a big factor. Obviously, I think last year was quite well, first of all, a difficult year, but second of all, a weird year in terms of e-commerce. We've seen some big spikes, especially around Q2, and then Q4 was good, but just less good than Q2. So it was quite weird. I think um, overall for us the key thing was timing. You know, it was the right moment to come into the market, and obviously you have a bit of luck that you're early on hitting sort of right of some of these right customer segments that you're tapping into, um, and then it's just really going deep into what works.
Mm.
Focus.
And with the product and the service generally taking off, I see that you've really grown out the team as well, again, throughout 2020 and into this year as well. So what's that look like in terms of how many people have you brought on, and how did you find that during, I guess, what was a remote time for the business?
I think we started so with three co-founders back in 2015, and we're currently around 120 people. Um, I think the we doubled headcount from 2019 to where we are currently, and we've brought on board many colleagues during COVID and working from home. Um, Fortunate enough, we're quite quite remote friendly already from the get go, having multiple offices, you know, within London, within the UK, within Vietnam, and many people working in Russia and Brazil. So we're always quite digitally first in terms of how we communicate. Um, but the onboarding itself, we invested a lot in just more touch points. You know, over communicate, make sure that people find their feet quickly, and obviously when you bring on board a role within a specific team, make sure that he or she, whoever joins, also has touch points within other teams. Um, and then alongside, we do a lot of ceremonies. We got our monthly town hall, ask the CEO sessions, and all of those things really help to sort of make drive clarity around the mission and how everybody individually is contributing to that, and obviously the whole working together
We,
around it to
we
make it work.
we find a lot of founders, when they've grown at the rate that you have, that they struggle to maintain company culture, particularly when it gets to the point where they're onboarding people, often through people that have only recently joined the company. So is that something you've struggled with at all, or has that been fairly smooth?
I think things like company cultures, it's a fluid thing. The company is driven by not myself anymore. Although I obviously, together with my co-founders and the leadership team, we have a big role to play here. But it's more and more driven by, you know, the face of the business, the types of customers you're serving, and the people you bring on board. And it's fluid. But yeah, it is hard. It remains hard, especially in a very complicated global business like ours. We are selling across every single country in the world. We've got a very global pool of people working within the business across different teams, different seniority levels, from early 20s up to, you know, anywhere in the 50s, and so that diversity is exciting if you can nail it, but it requires a bit harder in terms of working together, to really make it work.
Mm. Absolutely. And one of the other things that we find that it's often a challenge for people jumping through these steps as they're scaling their business very quickly is just around compliance. So when it comes to topics like law, where it's so vast from shareholder agreements to employment law to everything else, what have the real challenges been there as you've grown?
I think it's not top of mind when you start a business. Um, and the first thing you do is you get a lawyer, right, to draft up your shareholders agreements and your articles, um, and now alongside we are obviously compliance has to be embedded within the business from the get-go. We are taking transactions globally. We're paying millions of pounds out of commissions. So we've got to, and then we have to be legally compliant in local markets everywhere where we do business, and that's a lot of work. We I think my learnings are: one, get a really good lawyer. Two, make sure you have multiple lawyers, right? Every law firm has its own expertise, so make sure you have that as a capability. But also, we currently have our in-house legal team, which is really important from a cost saving perspective, but also just having someone here who has the knowledge, the expertise, and the maturity to guide us through that. And that's been a really a big relief. That's a change. That's something we've done over the last 6 to 9 months. That's really helped us a lot and gain that maturity. Where compliance, it's not binary. It's an evolution, and really understanding what to focus where before things are too late. I think having that in house at this moment in time for our skill is really a must.
And do the legal challenges remain the same today as they were while you were really
Yeah,
growing at a fast rate? That stays fairly constant.
yeah. The exposure and the impact of things going wrong is just much higher, right? You got more to lose. There's more volume flowing through the platform. That's why there's increased focus obviously on making everything work, and especially once we started working with enterprise customers, really large retailers, and we started with alongside dynamic young entrepreneurs, and obviously once you start working with big enterprise clients, it brings a completely new dynamics because you've got to match their compliance requirements on specific areas that might not have been top of mind
Mm.
because we're in a slightly different state or maturity of the business, if that makes sense. um, and so that's definitely been a learning for us is as a startup scale up, you do your risks assessments, you make sure you invest in the areas where it's important, where you're managing the risks accordingly, but also being commercially pragmatic, and that balance is quite important. And because you don't want to be over indexing on either one of them. Once you start working with enterprise customers, I think it's got to be a conscious decision because the implications on the business in terms of ways of working, including compliance, are are quite impactful. Um, it's a different scale.
And we've touched on a range of things today in this conversation, from starting as a one-man band through funding, growing the team, the legal side. How's this impacted your role as the founder? How's that evolved over time?
I think we don't see ourselves anymore as a founder-led business. We built out a leadership team with CFO, CTO, CPO, and a CMO. And founders always play a role: storytelling, culture, etc. And obviously we know things end to end, which is helpful. But our role now is to bring to continue supporting the energy, the storytelling, and the vision. But it's very much now the leadership team who's driving their own respective areas, and making sure it all ties in together. So I think as a founder, our role has evolved. We'll always be founders, obviously, but it's far more widely carried in terms of strategy and how we execute upon things.
What's next for Moteefe then? It sounds like you've got a lot of the key things now in place. So what are the big goals for the next 12 months or so?
I think we always need to invest in the foundational capabilities that bring you towards the next phase of scale. When we started, I never thought that first million in sales felt like a really big number, and then you aim for five, and then before you know it, you start aiming for 5 million per month, etc., etc. So it's always reinvesting in your capabilities, technical, um, you know, within the business, and that's what we're continuously doing, like building out the platform, making sure we've got the right foundational capabilities to hit that scale where we can continue to grow, you know,
Absolutely. So
two, three, four, 5x.
where can those people, for those listening, where can they find out more about Moteefe?
Well, you can hit us up on the website, on social media channels, YouTube. We our channels are really focused on communicating to our merchants and our users. Obviously, a bit more of the general company comms is through LinkedIn, and that's where it's probably a good place to start. And otherwise, if someone's interested in the proposition, you know where to find me on LinkedIn.
People over documents. What does that mean? It is extremely important in international work to focus on communication with people. Don't think of companies, but do think of individuals. And that means making sure that any contractual document that you have is simple and clear and easy to read. The point of a cross-border contract is not to help you win in a dispute, though that's important. The point is to communicate obligations and rights to the other side. For online work or e-commerce, the way that we communicate becomes increasingly different when we're dealing with cross-border counterparties. There is no backup. You can't just pop in and have a chat with people. So we need to frame the way we communicate and remember that what we say will be retained by the counterparty and treated almost as if it is some kind of binding document. Thirdly, when we're dealing with countries where the rule of law is weak, we're sometimes told by business development people that the most important thing is relationships. Now, counterintuitively, considering what I've just said, you'll find that in those jurisdictions, the one time when rule of law is very strong is when it is aimed at you, the foreign party. So we have to be even more careful than we would be in our home country. And to summarize these 3 points together, I think it's fair to say that communication is key.